This is Melissa Gonzalez. Today is December 18th, 2013, and I am interviewing Mr. Allan Bunky Garonzik for the first time. This interview is taking place at the University of Texas at Arlington Central Library in Arlington, Texas. This interview is sponsored by the College of Liberal Arts and is part of the Maverick Veterans Voices Project. So let's get started. Are you originally from Arlington?
I am not. Originally from Dallas.
And did you participate? Were there any ROTC programs in your high school?
There was. They had a junior ROTC program in which I did participate.
So why did you choose to attend Arlington State College?
I did choose Arlington because of the military science department. That was my goal.
And how did you hear about the program?
Oh, I had neighbors and I had friends that had gone here that were in the military department, and that's what got me interested in Arlington in the first place. And plus it was affordable.
Was that also what interested you in the military to begin with?
Yes. When I decided to come to Arlington, which was not immediately after high school, I did work for a while before I came to Arlington. But it was because of the military. That was my idea as a career. I wanted to be a career military Army aviator.
So what year did you start at Arlington State College?
Well, I graduated in 1961, and I first went to, after graduation, moved to New Orleans. I was 17 years old, moved to New Orleans, and worked in a machine shop in New Orleans for a period of time and decided that was not the career I wanted. And so I actually started the fall semester, it would be the spring semester, in midterm in 1962.
What was your major?
It was business administration.
Why did you choose that major?
Well, frankly, at the time, business was kind of a pay your fees, get your B's, and I just knew that I needed a college degree to go into the military, and that seemed to be the most likely and, frankly, the easiest avenue for me.
So what were your first impressions of the college?
It was small and it was close-knit. It was mainly a commuter school, as everyone knows back in those days. Most of the students came from the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Very few lived on campus. And it just was a small school, and I liked that tidy environment. There was a big military influence within the school. Most of the members, the male members of the university, or students of the university, were mostly in military back then.
Did you live on or off campus?
I lived on campus the whole time.
Did that affect your education with the ROTC? Did it make it easier to get to classes?
It did, of course, make it easier to get to classes, although I did work the entire time, so I had to leave campus to go to work and then came back.
So what was your commute like between work and college?
Well, I had pretty much of a checkered career while I was in college as far as working, but I did work at least 40 hours the entire time I was in school, and so I had various jobs. There was at least one semester where I actually worked in Dallas on the weekends, so had to leave Arlington to go to Dallas and then come back after the weekend. And there was another semester, the semester that I got married, which was in 1964, I actually had a job at a freight dock in Dallas, and I worked at the freight dock and got off at 2 o'clock in the morning and had to come back to school, and I worked at the cafeteria as part of the room and board at the student union building, which we called the sub back then. I think it's now called the student center, and I had to be there at 5:30. So my study time was somewhere between 2 and 5:30 in the morning, and that was subtracting the drive time for that. And I remember taking 18 hours and having 8 o'clock classes. That was a brutal semester for me.
So I take it affected your education, or was it?
Well, as far as education, I'm not convinced that I really learned all that much, but as far as grades, it did affect my grades, although coincidentally and incidentally, that particular semester was the only semester I made real good grades. And it was because you just you couldn't drop a stitch. You had to study when you had the allocated time, and if you didn't, you didn't get it done. There wasn't time for that.
Since it was such a tight-knit community here on campus, and I imagine especially with the ROTC group, were there any campus activities that you participated in other than ROTC?
Yes, I was a staff photographer for, at the time, the Reveille, which was the yearbook. I understand they no longer produce that as such, but I was a photographer for 3 years for the Reveille, and also did some work for the Shorthorn, which I understand is still going. And so I have pictures that would be in both of those over the years.
So you said you married while you were enrolled at Arlington State College?
Yes, I got back from, at the time we called it summer camp. I think it's called leadership development course right now, but same thing. And I got back from Fort Sill in August of '64 and got married, I think 4 days later from the time I returned home.
What was your relationship like with other cadets on campus?
The cadets, especially the Jodies, the military drill team, was a very close-knit community. The Jodies, from the time that I was on the team, are still some of mostly my best friends, are still guys that I knew from college and that were on the Jodies.
Were there any pranks that you played on one another?
The answer to this question will depend on the statute of limitations. I'm going to assume that a lot of that's gone away. Yes, that was pretty much my stock in trade, was the prankster, and some of them were pretty serious pranks, but we had fun, so we had to have fun. There was a war going on, and I think during the time of war that guys that are slated to be soldiers are a little bit kind of laissez-faire, one might say, and so we don't care about a lot of things because you never know what the outcome of your military service is going to be. So pranks and taking chances and risks was just something that we did, and so yeah, we had a lot of pranks.
So what was a day in the life of a cadet at that time?
I lived in what was called Davis Hall, which I believe now is called Brazos Hall, and there were no telephones the first couple of years. Then they actually had phones in the halls after that, so everybody had a common area of the phones in each of what they called the ramps, which was that's the way that hall worked. You'd be on the first floor and then the second floor on A ramp, but you couldn't go from ramp A to ramp B without going outside and then across over. So it was like 4 stacked different individual facilities. And so if there was a phone on, say, the second floor of B ramp, then everybody on that floor had access to that phone. And so that was the level of communication to the outside world, as it were. And as a matter of fact, we used to answer the phone in World War III when the phone would ring in the hallway, and then we'd have to go find the person who the call was directed to.
Can you describe what the Jodies did and your involvement with them?
The Jodies were a crack platoon, as it was originally called, back in, I believe, 1933 when they were founded. And our job, our goal was to go to various drill team competitions, perform at the halftime of the football game, go to the various parades. And so our center of life was around the Jodies. That's what we did. And it was, in a way, difficult because of the work and the school and the activities. We used to practice about 15 to 20 hours a week, and that would intensify as we got closer to a competition. And we were intense on being the best. That was what we strived to. And those folks that were on the drill team back then have proven to have had good careers, stellar careers, both in the military as well as civilian life, almost to a man. An example I'd like to cite was back then the Army's elite forces were the Special Forces, the Green Berets, and then, and even in the Barry Sadler song, only 3 out of 100 that apply for the Green Berets make it. And out of the drill team that I was on that had approximately 40 members, I think there were about 10 or 12 that actually made the Green Berets, way higher than the national average. Most were airborne qualified, most were Rangers, and that handful were Green Berets.
Do you think that was attributed to the training you received?
It was. It was attributed to not so much the drill and ceremonies type training, but the dedication and the direction and the focus of military life.
Did any professors or instructors significantly influence you?
Well, absolutely. There were some that influenced in a very positive way. I can remember, and by name, we had Colonel McDowell, who was he was in the paratroopers during World War II, dropped behind enemy lines in Czechoslovakia, and Colonel Max Manifold was a major at the time, and Colonel Manifold was an Army Ranger that hit the beaches of Normandy. And so these were very effective instructors, and they were very influential. We also had 2 sergeants that I remember by name, Sergeant Dixon, who was a POW in the Second World War, and Sergeant Calvert, who was a mentor, an airborne ranger, and in his 20s back then, and we looked up to these guys. Unfortunately, there were some that came after that were not quite as influential in a positive way.
Do you felt being involved with junior ROTC in high school prepared you for being a cadet?
Only in a minor way. The high school ROTC was, you learn a few things. You can't say you don't learn a few things, but if I were to put it in perspective, somebody after one semester in military science 1 at university level would have caught up with anything learned at in a junior ROTC program. That's the way I see it. This is not to say that the junior ROTC is not a good program, but there's only so much that they can do. It's just one class out of your curriculum at high school.
Did you graduate from Arlington State College, or at that time it was University of Texas at Arlington by that time?
Well, that's an interesting story. It was the University of Texas at Arlington when I showed up on campus, and in '65 it was officially changed, I believe, to UT Arlington, and the first graduating class was '67, and I was in the first graduating class of 1967, and I like to tell the story that when I went across the stage to get a diploma, in those days they didn't give you a diploma, they just gave you a piece of paper wrapped in a rubber band, and when you turned in your cap and gown, you actually got the diploma. And I remember when everyone else was getting their high fives and talking to their parents and congratulations, well, I went backstage and turned in my cap and gown, so I actually got the very first diploma issued from University of Texas at Arlington.
I understand your class ring also had some significance.
Well, that's true. The class ring was affected that way. It was when I got the class ring, you had to have 65 hours of studies, and so I was able to get the class ring because I was, I understand, an unlikely candidate for a college degree. My high school grades were terrible. My college grades were a little worse than terrible, and so it was unlikely. So I, by gosh, wanted to get the class ring, and I did it. And when I had the 65 hours, which was 1965, when I ultimately graduated in '67, by then it was the University of Texas at Arlington, which I thought may have a little bit more significance nationally. So I actually sent the ring back to the Balfour Company and had the top half of the ring changed to University of Texas at Arlington. And the bottom half still has the rebel flag because we were the Arlington State Rebels back then. So yeah, it has a lot of, and unlike a lot of people, I still wear the ring. Matter of fact, I can't even get it off anymore.
So what would happen when a cadet approached their graduation date? What decisions were made?
Well, back again, I keep talking about in those days, for those people that were in the military science department that were about to graduate, you coincidentally were commissioned the same day that you graduated. And you would have had to, of course, completed your 4 years of ROTC and then get a degree. And they were expected to go to, they would have a choice, but it would call it a wish list. They didn't always get their first choice. That depended on a lot of things, the cadre being part of it, that decision-making process, their grades being another, and how they did generally. But then they would actually have to go to a combat branch first to get training there, which was infantry, artillery, and armor, one of those 3 combat branches. Then later they would go to another branch, which could be engineering, signal corps, a number of things, adjutant general, military intelligence, a number of things, but they had to serve in the combat branch first. Now, in my case, where I had finished my ROTC prior to graduation, I was delayed on the commissioning. And ultimately, I ended up moving back to New Orleans. I was in a reserve unit, and I moved back to New Orleans and worked at the same place that I had worked when I had graduated high school. That company had developed it was kind of a renowned hydraulics type engineering company, and so I had gained some knowledge there, and I had a clearance that related to military, to the military. They had 3 clearances without making it too complicated. They had a confidential clearance, a secret clearance, and a top secret clearance. I had a secret clearance that related to my military, and I had some unique knowledge of hydraulics, and so I was tapped on to go to work to buy hydraulic parts at LTV, which at the time was the 11th largest company in the world. And we bought and supplied parts for the U.S. military, specifically for Navy and Air Force fighter jets, F-8s and A-7s. And so I actually went there after graduate school at Tulane to work there. And so my time in the reserve just extended on for a total of about 8 years.
Okay.
But I never served an active duty role in the military.
So what were your duties and responsibilities as a reservist?
Well, as a reservist, there were still some, tough times, I suppose. I was in a military police unit, and back then, there was the problems at a lot of the universities. Kent State would happen during that time, and so what we as a military police unit did was we actually trained to work with, in support of National Guard units that would have to go to these various universities to prevent, stop, quell riot type purposes, and that's what we did. And of course the other training of disaster and so forth of Guard units, that's what we did.
So were you involved with that while you were at Tulane?
I was still in the reserves while I was at Tulane.
Okay.
So I worked a 60-hour week. I went to graduate school in the evening, and then I had military duties, weekends and so forth.
So what are some of your more memorable experiences from your time as a cadet and your time as a reservist?
Well, the time as a cadet, of course, is what really sticks in my mind, probably more than the military service per se, because that was a reserve. But as a cadet, we had a unified group of dedicated, potential and generally active Army, and in some cases Marine, in some cases Air Force. The cadet that graduated from UTA would generally get a Army commission, but there were instances where some cadets could just walk across the street and get the Air Force commission. And in one particular case, it was another gentleman who's also in the Hall of Honor got an Air Force commission because he wanted to fly jets, and he got commissioned in the Air Force having had Army and Jody training. So a little bit unusual on that, but that could happen.
So was your education supported by the GI Bill?
No, no. On the one hand, I'm a little bit proud of this, but on the other hand, I wish it didn't happen this way. I paid for 100% of my education. There were no scholarships. I didn't have the grades for that, and so I didn't have a good resume as it related to previous academics. So no scholarships, no athletic scholarship. I paid for the whole thing and worked the whole time. So it means a little bit more, although I would say that I didn't learn as much as potentially was available. Today it's important to make grades. Back then it was important to just graduate.
Do you feel what you learned as a cadet has influenced you now, either through your current work or past work?
Of course. As I look back at the training that I received while I was at UT Arlington, and before that Arlington State College, I would say 100% revolves around being a cadet and a Jody. That was what we learned. Stamina, perseverance, tenacity, getting the job done, dedication, all of those things. And I think those things are certainly important in the military, but they're also important in civilian life. And so I attribute everything, including the graduation. Had I not been on the military drill team, the Jodies, I would not have graduated. I didn't have the purpose to. I wasn't learning a lot from the academic end, so the only reason I got a degree was because of the Jodies. So yeah, it influenced me 100% in everything I've done.
You said you formed some close relationships or friendships while you were at Arlington State College. Do you still stay in touch, and how so?
I'm in touch with almost everybody that was on the drill team when I was on the drill team. And we actually started, when I was living in New Orleans in 1967, we started a Sam Houston Rifles Alumni Association, and I actually came up to Arlington to help get that started. And I was the president about the third go-round, and actually remained president for a number of years, and was the editor, and I wrote the newsletter and got it distributed, and I did that for well over 20 years.
So would you say you're somewhat the unofficial historian for the Department of Military Science?
Well, we actually had someone that was a historian that kept scrapbooks and whatnot, but
okay.
I probably know as much about the history and the continuity of the organization from the beginning.
So what was your experience serving as the president of the Sam Houston Alumni Association?
Well, I felt then and felt now that being in communication and maintaining the lines of communication and continuity was extremely important. And our members were scattered throughout. We had everybody, was deployed or went to some place, and very few remained actually in Arlington the whole time. And so that link to the outside world in terms of communication was, I think, paramount, and it kept the organization and the people in touch with one another.
Were you able to organize reunions?
I'm sorry.
Were you able to organize reunions?
Yeah, we had a reunion for every year, and the reunion coincided with homecoming activities. And I will say that since I graduated in 1967, I've not missed a homecoming.
Do you like that homecoming has moved from February back to the fall?
I think the thing that I'm most disappointed in as far as homecoming is it used to revolve around football games. So like so many alumni, not having a football team is not a plus, in my opinion, for the university. If someone comes to a school, the full college life, I think, is important from the perspective of the football team. And I know it's a financial consideration, but from the perspective, you have the marching band, you have the marching drill team, you have the cheerleaders, you have the continuity, you have the purpose. And to have a major school like UT Arlington in the middle of the Dallas Metroplex Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in Texas and not having a football team, it is, in my opinion, somewhat embarrassing.
I think many people would agree with you on that. So you were inducted into the UTA Hall of Honor in 2007 and honored as a UTA Distinguished Alumni in 2009. Can you describe receiving those honors?
I think as far as UTA Hall of Honor, I would say the word that comes to mind is shocked, because I did not have a stellar military career. However, the criteria for the Hall of Honor at UTA Arlington, Military Hall of Honor, is a copulation of military service, of community service, of supporting of the university, and various charity events, those sorts of things. And so I felt as though that's what prompted me to get into the Military Hall of Honor.
So what community events do you participate with?
For 22 years, I was involved with the Leukemia Society. We have a branch of the Leukemia Society that's called the Chili Society, and I was the president of the Chili Society for a number of years, and that all of the proceeds from the various events that we did, 100% went to Leukemia Society. So for 22 years, I was involved with the Chili Society, and for 5 of those years, I was the president. As far as other community events that I participated in, I was involved with American Red Cross during the Katrina relief, and I was involved with the relief efforts on the explosion in West. We put together a cooking team, and then about 10 hours after the hurricane, after the explosion, we were down there cooking. We served 2,000 meals in a one-day period, and our guys, picked up and went home after that. And I've been involved in a number of events. The Boy Scouts, I was a assistant scoutmaster in the Boy Scout. My son is an Eagle Scout. I participated in those events for 5 years, never missed a camp out. And Indian Guys, my daughter was in Indian Guys and went to all of those events. So a lot of things that relate to community events I've been involved in. And of course my work here at UTA Arlington.
So what was your involvement in the UTA Corps of Cadets 126-mile march to Fort Hood in 2010?
Yes, I put together a cooking team for that event, and we had 3 of our members that actually went and participated the entire march, which was over a 5-day period. And we would show up and cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner for that period of time for those days for all the cadets that went on that march. And we also called on various other Jodies that showed up at these different events, different cooking times, not every day, but if we were near Fort Hood or down in Central Texas, those folks that lived there would show up and help us cook. It was an enlightening, interesting, and educational experience. I can remember one guy, Lee B. Wilson, he was also in our Hall of Honor. Lee V. was in the Green Berets and the 5th Special Forces in Vietnam for a couple of tours. And there he was with a paper cook hat and cooking meals for the cadets. It was something that sticks in my mind.
So returning to campus as an alumnus, how has the campus changed?
Well, it's night and day. This campus has grown exponentially. Just walking through it today, seeing all the courtyards and the trees and the beautiful buildings and all that. I will say that the dormitory that I lived in, although it's changed its name, it's still standing, and Lord knows we tried to take it down a number of times.
So, is there anything you would like to contribute to the interview that I haven't asked you?
well, I know we can't talk too much about the pranks because some of those things were a little bit on the, let's call it shady side. One such event was we we formed a detail, and where we put a lot of the military training together, where we formed a group. Each one had a job and a task and a responsibility, and we drove up in the middle of the night about 2 o'clock in the morning, and let me use the word liberated the antique military cannon that was in front of one of the dormitories there at University of North Texas. It was North Texas State University then. And we took it apart in the middle of the night, right in front of the dormitory, right in front of the fraternity house, and loaded up in several cars. It weighed about 1,000 pounds total, and brought it back and reassembled it in my room in the dormitory. And we all took a blood oath to keep that a secret, and that lasted about 30 minutes, I suppose. By 8 o'clock in the morning, people were knocking on the door wanting to see the cannon. And eventually the campus security came by and gave us an ultimatum. It needed to be out in the front yard, and so the long and the short of the story is we disassembled it, reassembled it in the front yard, and a wrecker came and picked it up, took it back to Denton.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Garonzik. You were helpful and informative, and it was a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for your contribution to this project.
Thank you. My pleasure.